What's up, YouTube? Silver Dragons here, and I'm super excited because today I'll be talking with Max Porterfield, the President, CEO, and Director of Callinex Mines. Max, thank you so much for coming on with me.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Absolutely, and we're going to be talking about some really cool stuff. We'll be covering the economy, inflation, gold and silver, and of course, Callinex Mines. So I want to start off with something big. I mean, this is crazy what's going on. $30 trillion in global policy stimulus in 2020 and 2021, 17 trillion fiscal, 13 trillion monetary. What do you make of all of these easy money policies?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be very inflationary on the economy. Obviously, it's going to devalue the dollars when you increase money supply at the speed that they have. You can't do that without having some pretty big implications on that. Obviously, they're going to talk to the contrary, and they talk their book, but it's no different than Bernanke saying everything's fine with the housing market just before the housing collapse. So definitely, it's going to be inflationary. I don't think it's going to change. I mean, really, politicians since the mid 1970s, in particular, have really heavily relied on a mismanaged budget spending to feed promises that someone is going to pay for in the future, in theory. And so it's going to be very inflationary, and you're seeing that across the board. And then, in this little shorter blips where you have, a big move in lumber prices and then a collapse in them, short area afterwards, I kind of point to that. But, I think you look across the board from an inflationary standpoint, it is definitely an inflationary cycle with everything that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I look at is the PCE index. It's the price index for American consumer spending. And we don't have the numbers yet for August. Those come out, I think, September 14th. But if we go back to July, they rose at a rate of 4.2%, which is the fastest pace since January of 1991, which was before I was even alive. So this is like literally record-breaking, crazy inflation that we're seeing. And with all of the spending that the government's doing with their infrastructure plans and whatnot, you think we're still going to keep seeing inflation down the road?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's going to end. The spending isn't going to end. And when it does end, it's going to be a pretty tough pill to swallow. So I think the strategy is probably to inflate the way out of the debt, because that'd probably be the easiest way to do that and do so very, very carefully. But in terms of infrastructure spending, I think infrastructure spending is going to be a big, big boom for the economy. It'll be a big boom for job creation. It has historically. I mean, you've seen it in the United States during the mid 1950s with the interstate build out. It was used obviously to come out of the Great Depression, out of World War II, in terms of creating jobs by building the national parks in the United States. The Chinese have used infrastructure spending very strategically for long-term job creation within that economy, with building the bridges, the roadways, airports, telecommunication systems, all that sort of thing. And the Chinese are now doing something much larger than the U.S. is going to do domestically in their One Belt, One Road initiative to really connect China across to Western Europe and Africa. So these infrastructure plans are going to have big, big demands on the metals markets and also big drivers for job creation. But at the same time, it's not going to change the policymakers' behavior. And that behavior has been to rely on everlasting debt, thinking there's no kind of recourse to that. I mean, if you look up to all wars that were started in the United States, really up until George Bush in the Iraq War, they were all led to higher taxes to pay for that and facilitate that. We're just coming out of a 20-year war in Afghanistan that's been fully funded on debt, but they'll replace that spending in some other way. And infrastructure and other social programs and entitlement programs are certainly a surefire bet, I think, where the money's going to go.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And, one thing that I always talk about on my channel is sort of how we can protect ourselves from inflation, because there's no way around it. I mean, the dollar is going to keep getting weaker over time. I mean, this is absolute insanity. So I talk about stacking silver, stacking gold, like buying the physical, and then obviously investing as well. How do you feel about stacking physical metals? You think that's a prudent thing to do?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I think that you need to have a percentage of your portfolio in physical metals, gold and silver. I mean, it's been a currency for thousands of years, and that's no different. And then, I obviously have a part of that allocation also split to the equities, which will give you more liquidity, as well as I think in a rising market, you'll tend to outperform in the equities for these underlying miners and explorers to that end. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, definitely a diverse portfolio is important. One thing that we don't always talk about as stackers is some of the other metals. Now, I know that China is pushing for this EV revolution, and they're wanting to do that here in the United States. And so these politicians are trying to, find zinc, copper, even silver for these different programs, and they could be difficult to find. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, the numbers that are coming out is they're very, very drastic changes in expectations in terms of the shift in really the generation for power in terms of moving around transportation with the EVs. I mean, seeing electrifications are pretty much everything from the toothbrush to the skateboard to obviously the EVs, which are going to have a big demand for metals, and they're doing so on a very, very short time horizon, making these decisions without looking further down the supply chain in terms of how you're going to meet that. I mean, if you look at it, it's not just in the United States, the UK, they all have these, seem to agreed upon collectively that 2030 seems to be the year where they want a majority of these new vehicles sold to be EV, and you can't do that without metals. So that's going to be absolutely a big demand driver. It's a new shift in demand, and government policy is obviously a key driver to different things taking place. And again, the demand for metals is going to be unparalleled, particularly in the base metal space, the battery metals, and that's why we like to be positioned in copper and zinc, because on the supply side of things, you've really had a lack of investment overall in general since the 2008 financial crisis, particularly in the base metal space, because you've had stagnant prices. So there hasn't been a big incentive to go out there and do exploration for base metals in particular. And, obviously higher prices incentivize explorers to go out there and do that. But for kind of a conceptual idea here, it takes 7 years on average from a discovery hole to go to production for a copper mine. And so, you can't just turn on the switch, so to speak, and automatically have a discovery and then have the discovery go into production. And with that being said, if you look at big discoveries, whether it be gold, base metals around the world globally, you've had a decline of big discoveries, and because they're becoming harder and harder to find, a lot of the easy discoveries have really already been made in the past. So you're having to go more remote areas or use new technology or think about things in different ways to make those discoveries. And it is time intensive. For example, at Pine Bay, where we've been exploring and have been a focus of the company since 2014, we had our big discovery hole wasn't until last August of 2020. And now that we're expanding that. So again, these things take a lot of time. It's very complex work. And you can't just turn on a switch, so to speak, to get that supply because it simply is not out there.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned it's about 7 years for copper. You find it, and all these things have to fall into place before production, etc. A lot of people have said that we're sort of in a super cycle for precious metals. I know you mentioned increased demand for base metals, but precious metals as well. And then we have all of this inflation. So it's like two things kind of converging at once. I mean, obviously there's more factors than that, but it seems like over this decade, we could see massive growth for metals. Is that what you see as well?
Yeah, absolutely. You have a massive growth for metals, but at the same time, the constant consciousness of, I think, the world overall in general has shifted pretty dramatically in a very short period of time. So it's not necessarily only how are you getting the metals, because you have to keep in mind where you produce the metals. What is the ethics behind producing in certain jurisdictions? What is the power generation source that goes into a production scenario? For example, in northern Manitoba, where we've just had that discovery, the rainbow discovery I'm mentioning, the high-grade copper, that's in close proximity to a hydroelectric power line. So that's a situation where we get clean, low-cost power generation, but that's not the case for a lot of the world's production of metals. And moving forward, investors are also being held by people that are investing in them to manage that money to a higher standard. So that's going to be more scrutiny on production as well when you need more production out there. So it's a precarious time, but an exciting time, because when you call her into a big discovery, it's going to be more rare and even more sought after moving forward into the future.
I will say it is a very exciting time, Max. And I do want to know a little bit more about Callinex Mines specifically. Obviously, that's the company you run. Can you talk about sort of what you guys are doing right now? Are you drilling? What stage is the company in?
Yeah, so we're drilling. We're doing a lot of drilling across the portfolio. So Callinex is an explorer of base and precious metals deposits in Canada. We've got a real focus on doing exploration in very close proximity to infrastructure, because the biggest hurdle to make a discovery, it's hard enough to make a discovery, but when you make one, it's how you're going to get the people, the access, water, electricity, all that sort of thing out to the deposit, and that's big money. Upfront capital costs can, in many instances, be in the billions of dollars, and that really is obviously a big hurdle. So we're focused on doing exploration and proximity infrastructure, in particular in these mining communities that are in deep need of discovery. For example, in Flin Flon, Manitoba, where we have this rainbow discovery that I mentioned earlier. That's an area that's had 100 years of continuous production, and the flagship mine that's really the key economic driver for that community of 5,500 people is shutting down next year. So there's that kind of macro demand drivers, also micro on the community level, and we're also able to leverage off of the infrastructure that's there. So in terms of what we're up to, the biggest capex for the company is drilling 30,000 meters as we expand the rapidly emerging rainbow discovery, which is about 20 minutes outside of that town of Flin Flon by existing road access. It also sits within about 200 meters of a hydroelectric power line. So you get, low cost, clean power in very close proximity. And the drilling, again, we made that discovery hole last August, and we've had steady drilling up until now. We're still drilling with 2 drill rigs as part of a 30,000 meter campaign. And that's to delineate the resource there. So once you make the discovery, obviously you got to see how much is there. And you do that by, putting holes systematically and expanding the mineralization there. And in terms of what rainbow is, for example, rainbow has shown some exceptionally high grade copper results. To kind of give you context, some of the results we've had have exceeded over 15% copper. And, on average, I think we're around, high 3s, low 4% copper range. And in most of the drilling that we've intersected to date there. On a global basis, if you look at, average grades of copper that are produced globally, it's actually 0.5%. And in terms of environmental kind of consciousness and growth moving forward, that's big bulk tonnage, low grade operations that are very energy intensive, where you produce a lot of the world's copper production. So to hit high grade copper, to be in the top 10 highest grade copper mines in the world, for example, you need north of 3.75% copper. So we're very excited about the grades that we're hitting, where we're hitting them, and the potential that Rainbow hosts for the future of Flin Flon and our shareholders. And that's what we're really dominantly focused on. In addition to that, we've got a deep portfolio of assets. We're also drilling in New Brunswick in the Bathurst district, and that's another area that's had a long, illustrious track record of base metal production. And we've got a zinc lead asset that's near surface, 25 kilometers away from a power station, deep water port, and a smelting operation that gives you access to market with a deep water port there and a rail line. And we've hit silver near surface in 2 very widely spaced holes. We announced that last year, and we're in the midst of a 4,000 meter drilling campaign to test targets along that trend that hosts those 2 silver discoveries that we've made, with a real potential, and that with success, we can put ourselves on a path to build a near surface silver resource in close proximity to what's already a PEA stage zinc lead asset in proximity to infrastructure. So again, that's where the real focus of the company is. We also have an asset in Newfoundland that's a gold, copper, zinc-rich historic resource that we're looking to update. Again, just focused on a safe jurisdiction in Canada in proximity to infrastructure.
Can you talk about the sort of how much of the company is owned by insiders, family, associates? Because I know people want to invest in companies that are very tightly held. Hopefully the people at the company believe in it. I mean, I've been looking over some of the stuff regarding you specifically, and it looks like you put your life savings in this company. Is that right?
Well, I don't disclose my entire net worth, but I have put a significant part of my personal net worth in the company. I own personally just under 5% of the shares outstanding. My family also, collectively myself and my family are roughly around 15%. Insiders and close associates, which include them, be in total 25%. And we've also got some really great institutional shareholders, namely Resource Capital Funds has been a long-term shareholder of the company since 2015. They own just under 8%. And then we've brought on some more recent institutional shareholders like Delbrook, which is a resource-centric fund out of Vancouver here where I reside. That's a significant shareholder of the company. So again, it's a mix. Obviously, I put my money where my mouth is, and I'm a big believer of what we're up to in our long-term objectives and goals. And that's really ultimately to create long-term job creation through discovery for these Canadian mining jurisdictions, and to do so at a time where the world desperately needs these metals.
And before we wrap up here, can you talk about what you guys are focused on in 2021? What's going to be the next big things? Because I know whenever drilling news comes out, it's really exciting. So can you talk about sort of what you're doing for the rest of this year?
Yeah, so we're going to do a lot more drilling. So again, we're in a 30,000 meter drilling campaign. We've announced less than half of those results to date. Those 2 rigs have been operating since February, and they're going to continue to operate in Manitoba to expand that high-grade copper discovery, the Rainbow deposit that I had mentioned earlier. And that's going to be consistent news flow out of that. So again, that's going to be where the bulk of the news flow is to expand Rainbow and also potentially test some targets that are being generated as well by our technical team. And then also news flow out of the silver exploration campaign in New Brunswick at our Nash Creek project, where we're following up on those 2 widely spaced near surface silver discoveries that we made last year. And then to wrap things up, we'll also have an updated resource on that Point Leamington deposit that I briefly mentioned in Newfoundland, which is a large historic gold, copper, zinc resource that we're going to be bringing up to modern day compliance from the regulatory standpoint, and then also outlining regional exploration targets, just like we've done in Manitoba and New Brunswick with a lot of success. We plan to expand that at some point in the future to Newfoundland.
Awesome. Well, that's very exciting. If people want to get a hold of you or want more information, where should they look for that?
Well, the best place to do that's on our website at callinex.ca. That's CALLINEX.ca. All our contact information is on their investor presentation and our news. And then if you're interested in becoming a shareholder of the company, you can do so in the United States under the ticker CLLXF. And then we also trade in Canada, of course, on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the ticker CNX.
Awesome. Well, again, that was Max Porterfield, President, CEO, Director of Callinex Mines. Thank you so much for coming on, Max. I really appreciate all the insight and the info on your company.
I appreciate you having me. Thanks so much.
And for everyone out there watching, I want to say a massive thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you all in my next one. Silver Dragons out.